Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. I didn't notice him move in right away. In a 6th-floor walk-up in a city like mine, new tenants appear and disappear without much fanfare. It wasn't until the packages began piling up that I realized someone had taken over the long vacant Unit 4B, directly across from my own. At first, it was small things. Amazon boxes, a bulky suitcase left outside the door for 2 days, a parcel from Germany that reeked of old earth, the scent thick enough to wrinkle my nose whenever I passed it. And then one day, I saw him. He was already unlocking his door as I reached the top of the stairs. Thin, extremely tall, maybe 6'5", with grayish, uneven skin, like he'd been sick for a long time. His head turned slowly when I greeted him. "Hey there, new to the building." He didn't respond right away. He just stared, eyes bloodshot and yellowed around the edges, then gave me a small nod. "Name's Rachel," I added. Still nothing. No name in return. Just a soft click as he disappeared into his apartment. At first, I chalked it up to eccentricity. New Yorkers are strange, and I've met my fair share of the socially awkward. But then the noises began. Every night, around 2:33 a.m., I'd wake to something moving in the hallway. Not walking, shuffling. A heavy, dragging sound, like someone pulling a thick rug across a wooden floor. When I peeked through my peephole the first time, the hallway was empty. The second time, he was standing right outside my door, back turned to me, just standing there, completely still, with one hand braced against the wall. I stayed quiet, barely breathing, watching for what felt like an hour, and then he turned, not towards me, but completely around, head still facing forward, body twisting as though his spine were a rope being wrung out. One shoulder cracked audibly. I recoiled, heart pounding. When I looked again, he was gone. I reported it to the landlord, Jerry, who lived on the ground floor. He scoffed. "That guy pays on time. No complaints. You sure you didn't dream it?" I started setting up my phone to record at night. I didn't want to seem crazy, but something was deeply wrong. My recordings caught things I couldn't explain. The sound of nails tapping on my door, slow and rhythmic. Faint whispering that wasn't in English. A wet noise, like slurping or chewing, right outside my apartment at 3 a.m. One morning, I opened my door and found a piece of raw meat sitting on my welcome mat, pink and glistening, still cold. I moved it with gloves, dumped it, bleached everything. That same night, I woke up to the sound of something scratching under my bed. When I finally got the courage to confront him, it was a Sunday morning. The sun was out, and I could hear a couple arguing downstairs, normal noise, comforting in its familiarity. I knocked on 4B. No answer. I knocked again, louder. The door creaked open, unlocked. "Hello," I called. I don't know what possessed me to step inside. Maybe fear had hardened into curiosity. Or maybe it was the smell, the same musty, earthy rot I'd first noticed in the hallway. The apartment was completely dark. Thick blackout curtains were nailed into the window frames. There was no furniture, no kitchenware, just a mattress in the center of the living room floor, soaked in something dark, and a hole, right in the center of the wall opposite the kitchen, big enough for a person to crawl through. The drywall had been clawed apart, shredded as if by fingernails. Inside was only blackness. I took one step forward, then heard the door behind me slam shut. I bolted, yanking the knob, heart thudding like a jackhammer. Locked. From the outside, I turned back to the hole. Something was moving in it, a scraping sound. Breathless, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The flashlight flickered as I aimed it toward the hole, and something inside moved. It was him, but wrong. Pale skin stretched too thin over sharp joints, his mouth unhinged at the jaw like a snake's, and from his chest, another arm unfolded, Small, child-sized, twitching. He crawled slowly forward, eyes rolled into the back of his head. I screamed, slamming myself against the door until it finally cracked open. I didn't look back. I didn't stop screaming until I was downstairs and outside in broad daylight, gasping, wild-eyed, in front of my building. The police found nothing. No hole, no body, no mattress. They said, Unit 4B is completely empty. Has been for months. I told them about the man, showed the package photos, the raw meat, the recordings. They shrugged. No fingerprints. Nothing on video. Could be a squat situation. You might be stressed. Jerry swore no one had moved in. He even offered to show me the lease log. No tenant. You're the only one on the 4th floor. They changed the locks. I started sleeping with the lights on. But last week, someone buzzed my door. I looked through the peephole. It was him, smiling, holding one of the meat packages, and whispering my name. When I moved into the duplex on Hemlock Street, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It was the kind of place you daydream about while rotting in overpriced studio apartments downtown. Hardwood floors, crown molding, a tiny fenced yard. The rent was suspiciously low, but the landlord waved it off with a laugh. No one wants to live next to an old man who doesn't talk. You'll barely notice him. He was referring to Mr. Dalka, the tenant upstairs. Hasn't missed rent in 15 years, the landlord added. Doesn't make noise, doesn't complain. Treat it like you're renting the whole house. At first, it did feel like I was living alone. The house had a stillness to it, as if everything had been sleeping for years and was only just beginning to wake up. The walls creaked sometimes, but they were old bones. Every house has them. Then one night I heard him. It started as faint footsteps overhead, not pacing, just movement. The kind of noise you'd expect from someone adjusting their position in bed or walking to the bathroom. But the strange part was the time, 3:11 a.m. Same time every night. I didn't think much of it, until I ran into the mailman one morning. You ever see the guy who lives upstairs? He asked, adjusting the brim of his hat. Not really, I said. I hear him sometimes at night. He squinted. You must have rats in the ceiling. Old man Dalka passed away 3 years ago. Never found anyone to take the upstairs unit since. I laughed, assuming he was joking, but he wasn't. That night, I stayed up until 3:11 a.m. I turned off everything. No music, no TV, just silence. Then I heard it again, the soft creak of a floorboard above my bed, followed by a slow, deliberate dragging sound. Something, or someone, was moving directly above me. I crept up the stairs with a flashlight, heart slamming in my chest. The door to the upstairs unit was shut, padlocked with a thick chain looped through the handle, the kind of lock you'd use to keep people in, not out. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. But just as I turned to go back down, I heard a whisper from behind the door. Don't leave me here. I backed away and called the landlord in the morning. Mr. Dalka died? I demanded. You told me he was just quiet. He sounded irritated. I said the guy upstairs wouldn't bother you. That was the truth. You want out of the lease, fine. But don't call me again with ghost stories. He hung up. That night, I bolted the downstairs windows, turned every light on, and curled up on the couch with a baseball bat. At 3:11 a.m., like clockwork, I heard the dragging sound. But this time, it didn't stay upstairs. It came down the steps, slow, heavy, like someone pulling a bag of wet clothes behind them, one step at a time. I held my breath. Then it stopped, right outside the living room. I waited for the doorknob to turn. It didn't. Instead, I heard a breathless voice. You hear me now? The next day, I broke the lock off the upstairs door. It wasn't just dusty, it was wrong. Everything was covered in a thick layer of powdery white. Not like dust, but like ash. The living room walls had deep scratches in them. Not from furniture, from fingernails. I found drag marks leading from the kitchen to the hallway closet. I opened it. Inside was a chair, straps on the arms, bite marks on the wooden seat, and a small cassette recorder labeled "Do Not Listen." Of course, I listened. Click. It's day 47. He comes at night now. He tells me things I don't want to hear. Says the body is still under the floor. That it's mine. But I'm not dead yet. I won't let him take my name. Click. Day 88. The silence is thicker now. He hides in it. My voice doesn't reach outside anymore. If I scream, the house swallows it. If I cry, it goes into the walls. Click. Day 102. There's another one. A second one. It looks like me, but wrong. It's quieter than the first. It smiles wider. I can hear it dragging itself down at night, looking for another mouth. Click. Silence. I yanked the tape out and hurled it across the room. That night, I didn't sleep. At 3:11 a.m., I sat on the stairs with a flashlight. The air was ice cold. The light flickered, and then I saw it. Not Mr. Dalka, but something wearing his shape. It moved like a puppet with its strings tangled, jerking and twitching as it dragged itself out of the hallway closet. Its mouth hung open. Inside were teeth that didn't fit, not human ones. When it saw me, it didn't speak. It smiled, and then it whispered with two voices layered over each other. You let me out. I fled the house that night, slept in my car. When the sun rose, I went back with police. The upstairs was empty. No tape, no chair, no scratches, no powder, no chain on the door. But the closet had a strange patch on the floor. The wood was newer, nails clean. They let me pull it up. Underneath was a small crawl space, and inside it, a second recorder, labeled with my name. When I was 9, my parents bought our first real house. Weathered, 2-story colonial at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac, just outside Maple Glen. There were 4 other homes on the street, all nearly identical. Trim lawns, white fences, cookie-cutter dreams. But only one house truly stood out, and that was the one directly next to ours. Number 215. Its shutters were permanently crooked. The grass grew a little too fast, and a little too wild. And its windows, always, without exception, had the curtains drawn, even on the hottest summer days. My mother told me not to bother the neighbors. They like their privacy, she said with a tight smile. We're not here to stir things up. But there was one thing she couldn't explain. The boy. He stood at his bedroom window every day, face pressed to the glass like a smudge of fog. Same blue t-shirt, same bowl haircut, pale and distant, like he'd stepped out of an old photograph and gotten lost in time. He never waved, never blinked, just watched. At first, I tried not to look. I even moved my desk so I wouldn't face his window, but it didn't matter. Every morning when I opened my blinds, there he was. I asked my dad once casually, "How long has the kid next door lived there?" He looked up from his cereal. "Kid? Yeah, the boy in the window. My age, maybe." He frowned. "There's no boy in that house. Only Mrs. Fenwick. She's in her 70s. I didn't believe him until I started paying attention. The boy never left the house. No lights turned on in his room ever. I never saw Mrs. Fenwick in the yard or walking her mail down the driveway. But every now and then, I'd hear things at night. Scratching, like long nails running across wood. Soft thuds, like someone pacing in bare feet. And the creak of that window opening, always followed by silence. One summer afternoon, while I was playing basketball in the driveway, the ball rolled into their yard. I hesitated, then chased it, heart pounding. As I stepped onto their overgrown grass, I could feel the shift in the air. It was cooler, heavier, like I'd walked through a doorway I couldn't see. I reached for the ball, but before I could grab it, the front door creaked open. He stood there. The boy, up close, his skin looked waxy, like a mannequin that had been left in the sun too long. His eyes were wrong, one pupil too large, the other too small. And his mouth, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't even really a smile, more like an imitation of one. "Want to come in?" he asked. I shook my head. His voice was low and toneless, like he didn't understand the words he was saying, just repeating them. He tilted his head. "I have toys." Then, from behind him, a voice rasped, "Back inside." It was Mrs. Fenwick, standing deep in the hallway, half shrouded in shadow. Her face was pale and gaunt, but her eyes, they weren't scared. They were tired and angry. The boy turned around slowly and walked back in without a word. She stared at me for a long moment, then slammed the door shut. I didn't sleep well that night. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. The boy began knocking on my window at night. Not tapping, knocking. Loud, forceful. Always at exactly 2:17 a.m. The first time I screamed. My parents rushed in, but he was already gone. The second time, I tried to ignore it. The third time, I opened the window and yelled, "What do you want?" He didn't respond, just stared at me with that broken-faced smile, then backed away into the dark, step by silent step. One night, he left something on my windowsill, a Polaroid photo. It showed me asleep in bed. The timestamp read 2:16 a.m. I told my parents. I begged them to believe me. My dad marched next door the following morning, but came back 15 minutes later, red-faced and embarrassed. "She's got cameras," he said. Showed me the footage. "No one's been near our house at night." "She's lying," I whispered. He lowered his voice. "She's a grieving mother, okay? Lost her son 30 years ago. Drowned in a well on her property. That window you keep talking about, it's been nailed shut since 1998. There's no boy in that room. There hasn't been for decades." I felt like I was going crazy, but I knew what I saw. That Halloween, the neighborhood kids dared each other to knock on Mrs. Fenwick's door. Of course, they picked me to do it. "No way," I said. "I'm not messing with her." "Why?" one kid smirked. "Scared of the ghost boy." The others laughed. I forced a grin. That night, I stood at her gate, plastic vampire fangs in my pocket, heart racing. I wasn't planning to knock. I just wanted to prove I wasn't afraid. But when I turned to leave, I saw something that stopped me cold. The boy was standing in the middle of the yard, not at the window. In the yard, barefoot, smiling, arms outstretched. "I picked you," he whispered. I backed away, but he stepped closer, and the ground beneath him seemed to wither. The grass died as he walked. The air grew colder. My flashlight flickered. I turned and ran, tears in my eyes, heart hammering. But as I looked back, he was gone. I never saw the boy again after that Halloween. Mrs. Fenwick passed away 6 months later. They found her in her hallway, arms covered in bite marks. The authorities wrote it off as dementia-induced self-harm. The house went up for sale 2 weeks later. I moved out before the new owners ever moved in. But I still think about that boy. That thing pretending to be a boy. Because just last week, I got a letter forwarded from our old address. Inside was a photo, another Polaroid. This time, it was my daughter's bedroom. And standing just outside her window was a boy with a crooked smile and a faded blue t-shirt. When my husband and I bought our first home, we weren't looking for perfection, we were looking for escape. After 5 years of apartment living in a loud, congested corner of Philadelphia, we wanted space. Quiet, something that didn't come with paper-thin walls, and a view of someone else's fire escape. The house we found was a small, 1940s ranch-style home nestled on a dead-end road in rural New Jersey, not far from the Pine Barrens, not close to anything that resembled a grocery store, but it was cheap, cozy, secluded. It felt like peace, even with its cracked siding and awkwardly shaped kitchen. The only immediate neighbor was an old woman named Mrs. Bellamy. She lived in a weather-beaten 2-story house, directly across the dirt driveway we shared. Her home was slightly larger than ours, but much darker, paint peeling, curtains never drawn. I'd occasionally catch her watching from her upstairs window as we unloaded boxes or brought in groceries, just standing behind the glass, unmoving, like an antique doll on display. The first time I waved, she didn't respond. My husband laughed it off. Creepy old lady across the street. Classic horror setup. I smiled, but something about her stillness lingered in the back of my mind longer than I wanted to admit. The first strange thing happened 3 days after we moved in. We were lying in bed when we heard footsteps in the attic. Not faint creaks, not shifting wood, footsteps. Heavy, pacing, directly above us. We didn't have an attic. Well, not exactly. There was a crawl space above the ceiling, accessible through a square panel in the hallway, but it wasn't tall enough to stand in, let alone walk. I told myself it had to be animals, maybe raccoons or squirrels. The next morning, we called pest control. The guy poked around for 20 minutes, then came back down scratching his head. No sign of anything up there. No droppings, no torn insulation. Totally clean. But we heard. I started. He cut me off gently. Old houses make noise. You'll hear things settle. Pipes shift. Air moves funny through crawl spaces. Nothing to worry about. We tried to sleep better that night. We failed. The sounds grew louder, more deliberate, scraping across the ceiling like someone dragging their fingers through loose dirt. Rhythmic knocking. Sometimes faint whispers we couldn't make out. Always around 3:30 in the morning. My husband climbed up one afternoon and peeked through the crawl space. I held the flashlight. The beam flicked across dusty beams, spiderwebs, and insulation. And something else. "Is that a chair?" he whispered. It was an old wooden chair, wedged in the far corner of the crawl space. Its legs were warped from moisture, but someone had clearly placed it there, facing the narrowest end of the roof, facing the wall. My husband crawled in, retrieved it, and brought it down. On the underside of the seat, carved into the wood in uneven, deep gouges, were 5 words. "She is not done yet." We stared at it in silence. He threw it out the same day. That evening, Mrs. Bellamy came to our door. It was the first time we'd ever seen her up close. She was thin, almost frail, with liver-spotted skin and eyes that refused to blink. Her clothes were old-fashioned, a long black dress with a high collar, like she'd stepped out of a different century. Her voice was raspy and dry. "Something has been disturbed," she said. My husband and I exchanged looks. "I beg your pardon?" he asked. Mrs. Bellamy didn't look at him. She looked past us, into the house, toward the ceiling. "There are rules here. That space above you." She was kept quiet by the weight of silence. "You've shaken it loose." Then, without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked away. We didn't sleep that night, either. The next few days blurred into a fog of unease. Our lights flickered, not in a random, faulty wiring sort of way, but always in the same pattern, a series of long, slow pulses, like breathing. We started locking the crawlspace panel shut. I placed a heavy suitcase on top of it, just in case. But the sounds didn't stop. They got bolder. One night, I woke to hear humming. A lullaby I didn't recognize, but that seemed impossibly familiar. My husband slept through it. Another night, I woke to find small piles of dirt at the foot of our bed. Not floor dirt, earth. Dark, fresh soil, like something from a grave. I vacuumed them up in silence. Then came the dreams. Always the same. I was lying in bed, unable to move, while something slithered down from the ceiling. Not a person, something long-limbed and boneless, like a shadow learning how to walk. It would press its mouth to my ear and whisper, "She's awake." We tried to confront Mrs. Bellamy again. This time, she refused to answer her door. All the windows were shut. We left a note. No reply. That night, the crawlspace panel slammed open at exactly 3:33 a.m. The suitcase toppled to the floor. My husband sprang out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat we kept by the dresser. He stood under the open crawlspace, jaw clenched, arms shaking. There was nothing there, but I saw it, just for a second. A pale hand, long and impossibly thin, retreating back into the shadows. Its nails were blackened, the fingers too many. It made no sound. That was the first night we left the house. We booked a hotel 30 miles away. While we were gone, I called the county records office. I asked about our house's history. The woman on the phone hesitated. Then she said, "You bought the Bellamy property?" "No, we're next to Mrs. Bellamy," I said. "She's our neighbor." A pause. "Ma'am, the Bellamy estate includes both properties. The house across from you was originally the main home. Yours was the caretaker's residence." I felt cold. "There was an incident in 1974, she continued. "The records are vague, but it seems a family member was kept hidden in the attic crawl space. A daughter. They say she was born wrong, aggressive. No one knows what became of her. The case was quietly closed. No charges. That night, I drove back home alone. The house was dark, but Mrs. Bellamy's window wasn't. She was there, looking directly at me. Then she smiled and turned off the light. We moved out within the month. We didn't tell the new buyers anything. We didn't go back for the rest of our stuff. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'll hear that lullaby again in the back of my mind, or I'll feel dirt beneath my fingernails, even though I haven't touched a garden in years. I heard recently that Mrs. Bellamy passed away, but her obituary didn't list any family, no descendants. And strangely, her name was never Bellamy. It was Marion Sefton. Bellamy was the daughter, the one who was never born right, the one they said never left the crawl space, the one I think followed us. Because last night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., my daughter woke up crying. She said there was a woman in her ceiling, and she was humming a lullaby I haven't heard in years. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a damp towel, heavy and suffocating. I'd moved to Willow Lane a month ago, a row of identical bungalows with neat lawns and faded shutters, each house a mirror of the next. My place was the last on the block, right beside Mr. Harrow's. He was an older man, maybe 60, with a face like crumpled paper and eyes that seemed to sink into his skull, dark and empty. I'd see him watering his roses at dusk, his movements slow, deliberate, like he was performing a ritual. He never spoke, just nodded when I waved, his lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. It started with the noises. At first, I thought it was the house settling, old pipes groaning, floorboards creaking under the weight of years. But the sounds weren't random. They came at night, always around 2 a.m., a faint scratching from a wall I shared with Mr. Harrow's house. It was rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood, slow and purposeful. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide, counting the scratches. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. Every night, the same pattern, like a code I couldn't crack. I tried to ignore it. New house, new quirks, I told myself. But then I saw the lights, flickering pale blue, seeping through the cracks of my blinds from Mr. Harrow's backyard. I'd peek through the slats, and there he'd be, standing motionless in his garden, the roses glowing faintly under that unnatural light. No flashlight, no lantern, just him and that eerie glow, like it was coming from inside him. I'd blink, and the light would vanish, leaving just darkness and the silhouette of his hunched figure. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, the air cold and sharp against my skin. The scratching was louder out here, echoing from his side of the fence. I called out, my voice thin in the stillness. "Mr. Harrow, you okay over there?" No answer, just the scratching, faster now, insistent. I shone the flashlight over the fence, and my stomach twisted. The roses were moving, not swaying in the wind, but writhing, their petals curling like fingers, reaching toward the beam of light. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and ran inside, locking every door. The next morning, I knocked on his door, determined to confront him. The house looked abandoned, curtains drawn, paint peeling, a faint smell of decay leaking through the cracks. He answered after what felt like forever, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. "What do you want?" His voice was gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in years. "I heard noises last night," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, "from your place, and saw lights." He stared, unblinking. "You shouldn't look where you're not wanted." Then he slammed the door. That night, the scratching turned to whispers. Not words, just sounds, hisses and murmurs, like a crowd muttering just out of earshot. I pressed my ear to the wall, and the whispers grew sharper, forming a single phrase. "He sees you." I jerked back, my pulse racing. Who was he? Mr. Harrow? Something else? I started watching him. From my window, I'd see him drag heavy bags into his backyard at night, the kind you'd use for yard waste, but they looked wrong. Too heavy, too lumpy. The blue light would flicker again, and the bags would disappear, swallowed by the earth beneath his roses. I told myself it was compost, manure, anything normal. But the smell, rotten metallic, clung to the air, seeping into my dreams. I called the police after a week of this, my nerves frayed to threads. I told them about the noises, the lights, the bags. They humored me, sent a patrol car to check on Mr. Harrow. They found nothing. He's just an old man, the officer said, almost laughing. Eccentric, maybe, but harmless. I wanted to scream that harmless men don't make their roses writhe, but I just nodded and watched them drive away. The whispers grew louder each night, now accompanied by a low hum, like a machine idling deep underground. I stopped sleeping, my eyes burning from staring at the wall. One night, I saw something new, a shadow moving inside Mr. Harrow's house. Too tall, too thin to be human. It glided across his windows, pausing as if it knew I was watching. The whispers surged, a chorus now. He sees you. He knows. Desperate, I broke into his backyard. It was past midnight, the air thick with that metallic stench. The roses were still, but the ground beneath them was soft, like it had been freshly turned. I started digging, my hands shaking, dirt caking under my nails. At first, I found nothing but roots, thick and pulsing, unnaturally warm. Then my fingers brushed something hard, a bone, long and smooth, human. I kept digging, uncovering more ribcage, a skull, fragments of cloth stained dark. The whispers screamed now, a deafening roar in my head. He sees you. I ran, tripping over roots that seemed to twist toward me. Back in my house, I locked the doors, barricaded the windows, but the scratching followed, louder, closer, coming from inside my walls now. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands trembling, and waited. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt liquid, slipping away. Then I heard it, a knock at my door, slow and deliberate. I didn't move. The knocking grew louder, shaking the frame. I know you're in there, Mr. Harrow's voice rasped. But it wasn't just his voice. Something else layered beneath it, deeper, older, like the hum of the earth itself. You shouldn't have looked. The door splintered inward, and there he was, his hollow eyes glowing that same pale blue, his mouth stretched too wide, teeth sharp and uneven. Behind him, the roses slithered across my lawn, their roots crawling like veins. I swung the knife, but he didn't flinch. He just stepped closer, the air around him buzzing with that hum, and whispered, "He's been waiting for you." I don't remember running. I don't remember how I ended up in my car, driving until the gas ran out. I'm in a motel now, miles away, but I can still hear the scratching. It's in the walls, in my head. Last night, I saw a rose petal on my pillow, its edges curling like a finger beckoning me back. I don't know what Mr. Harrow is, or what lives in his garden, but I know one thing. It's not done with me. The cul-de-sac on Elmwood Drive was a postcard of suburban perfection. Manicured hedges, kids' bikes scattered on driveways, and the faint hum of lawnmowers on weekends. I'd lived there for 3 years, long enough to know everyone's routines, except for Mrs. Callahan, the widow next door. She was a ghost in her own home, rarely seen, her blinds always drawn. Her house was the only one that didn't fit, paint chipped, porch sagging, like it was holding its breath. It started with the singing. Late at night, when the neighborhood slept, a faint melody drifted from her house. It wasn't a radio or a record, too raw, too human, a chorus of voices weaving together in no language I recognized. I'd lie awake, the sound curling into my ears, soft but insistent, like a lullaby from a dream you can't wake from. I'd check my windows, expecting to see her silhouette, but her house was dark, the blinds still. I mentioned it to my friend Tom over coffee. He lived across the street and laughed it off. Old Lady Callahan, she's probably got dementia, humming to herself. But I knew it wasn't one voice. It was many, layered, rising and falling like waves. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were singing to something. One night, the singing stopped mid-note, replaced by a single, piercing scream. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone to call 911. But before I could dial, the singing resumed, louder, angrier, like a swarm of bees trapped in a jar. I crept to my window and saw a faint glow from Mrs. Callahan's basement, pulsing like a heartbeat. I told myself to stay out of it, but the scream echoed in my head, and I couldn't let it go. The next day, I knocked on her door, a plate of cookies in hand as an excuse. She answered, her face pale, eyes like glass marbles, too wide and too still. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, like she was reading a script. "Just being neighborly," I said, forcing a smile. "Heard some music last night. Everything okay?" Her lips twitched, not a smile, but something else. "You shouldn't listen to things that don't concern you." She took the cookies and closed the door, leaving me with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The singing grew louder each night, now accompanied by footsteps, heavy and uneven, circling her house. I started keeping a journal, noting the times, patterns. The voices peaked at 3 a.m., always in that same strange tongue, sometimes joined by a low chant that made my skin crawl. I tried recording it, but my phone captured only static, as if the sound refused to be pinned down. One evening, I saw her in her backyard digging. She moved like a machine, her frail arms heaving shovelfuls of dirt. I watched from my porch, hidden by dusk, as she unearthed something, a wooden box, small and blackened, like it had been burned. She opened it, and the air seemed to shimmer, the singing swelling from nowhere everywhere. She didn't look up, didn't flinch, just buried the box again and went inside. I couldn't stay away. I waited until midnight, when the singing was at its peak, and snuck into her yard. The ground was soft, easy to dig, and I found the box quickly. It was heavier than it looked. The wood warm to the touch, carved with symbols that hurt my eyes to trace. I pried it open, and inside was a bundle of cloth, stained and brittle. Unwrapping it, I found bones, small, delicate, like a child's. The singing stopped, the silence so sudden it felt like a slap. Then the ground shook, a low rumble that knocked me to my knees. I ran home, the box clutched to my chest, and locked myself in. The singing didn't return, but the silence was worse, thick, alive, pressing against my eardrums. I hid the box under my bed, telling myself I'd take it to the police in the morning. But at 3 a.m., the footsteps came, not outside, but in my house. Slow, deliberate, circling my bedroom door. I grabbed a baseball bat, my breath shallow, and waited. The door creaked open, and there was Mrs. Callahan, her eyes glowing faintly, her mouth moving without sound. Behind her, shadows shifted. Too many, too wrong, their shapes stretching across my walls. "You took it," she whispered, her voice layered with others, a choir of the dead. "They need it back." I swung the bat, but it passed through her like smoke. The shadows lunged, cold hands brushing my skin, and I screamed, dropping the box. It burst open, the bones scattering, and the singing erupted, deafening, inside my skull. I blacked out. When I woke, I was in my bed, the box gone, the house silent. I moved out that week, but the singing follows me. It's faint now, distant, but it's there, in every new place I go. Last night, I saw Mrs. Callahan standing across the street from my apartment, her eyes locked on mine, her mouth moving in that silent song. I don't know what she is or what lives in her house, but I know it's not just her, and it's not done with me. Maple Street was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, but minded their own business. I'd been renting a duplex there for 2 years, sharing a wall with Mr. Tate, a retired mechanic who kept to himself. He was polite enough, always tinkering in his garage, the clank of tools a constant backdrop to my evenings. But there was something off about him. His eyes never quite met yours, and his hands were always stained, not with grease, but something darker, like ink that wouldn't wash out. It began with the smell, a faint, sour tang that seeped through the shared wall, like spoiled milk mixed with copper. I noticed it first in my kitchen, strongest near the vent we shared. I thought it was a dead mouse, maybe, or a clogged pipe. I left a note for Mr. Tate, asking if he'd noticed anything. He didn't reply, but the next day, he was in his garage, hammering louder than usual, the sound sharp and frantic. Then came the shadows, I catch them in my peripheral vision, darting across my living room, always near the wall. Never solid, just fleeting shapes, like someone pacing on the other side. I checked my windows, my doors, but nothing was out of place. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall, and I heard it, a low, wet gurgle, like someone trying to breathe through water. It stopped the moment I knocked, replaced by silence so heavy it felt like a presence. I started avoiding that side of the house. I'd eat in my bedroom, work in the backyard, anything to stay away from that wall. But the smell grew stronger, creeping into every room, and the shadows followed, bolder now, lingering in corners. I confronted Mr. Tate one morning, catching him as he carried a heavy duffel bag to his truck. "Something's wrong with the vent," I said, trying to sound casual. "You smell anything weird?" He froze, his hands tightening on the bag. "Mind your own," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He drove off before I could say more, the bag thumping in his truck bed. That night I heard footsteps, not in my house, but in his, heavy and uneven, like someone dragging something across the floor. I called the landlord, who promised to check the vent, but he found nothing. No clogs, no dead animals. "Maybe it's just old pipes," he said, but his eyes lingered on Mr. Tate's side of the duplex, uneasy. I couldn't sleep after that. The gurgling returned, louder, now joined by a faint tapping, like fingers on glass. I bought a cheap stethoscope online, desperate to figure out what was happening. Late at night, I pressed it to the wall and listened. The gurgling was clearer now, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. But there was something else, a voice, faint and garbled, repeating a single word. "Out." I moved to a motel for a few days, but I had to go back. Rent was paid, and I couldn't afford to break the lease. The first night back, I found a crack in the wall, hairline but new, running floor to ceiling. I touched it, and the plaster was warm, pulsing faintly. I backed away, my heart in my throat, and saw a shadow move behind the crack, tall and thin, its edges fraying like smoke. I broke into Mr. Tate's side the next day while he was out. The smell hit me like a wall, thick and choking, coming from the basement. I found the door behind a stack of crates, locked but flimsy. I kicked it open, and the stench poured out, so strong I gagged. The basement was dark, the air damp, and the walls were covered in scratches, deep and jagged, like something had clawed its way out. In the center was a pile of clothes, shirts, pants, stained and torn, some still wet with that dark, inky substance. I heard the truck pull up outside. I ran, locking myself on my side, but the footsteps came anyway, not to my door, but to the wall. The tapping started, slow at first, then faster, like a code. I grabbed a hammer, ready to smash through, to confront whatever was there, but the wall cracked open before I could swing. A hand reached through, long and pale, fingers dripping with that black ink. I screamed, stumbling back, and the hand retreated, the crack sealing itself like a wound. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. I'm in New City now, but the smell follows me, faint but unmistakable, in every apartment I rent. Last week, I saw Mr. Tate's truck parked across the street, his silhouette in the driver's seat, watching. I don't know what he's keeping in that house, or what it wants, but I know it's not just him, and it's still looking for me. Pineview was a sleepy apartment complex, all brick and faded carpet, where nobody bothered you if you didn't bother them. I'd been in 4B for 6 months, right across from Mrs. Verna, an old woman who shuffled around in slippers and a faded cardigan. She seemed harmless, always muttering about her cats, though I never saw any. Her door was always cracked open, just enough to glimpse a dim hallway that seemed to stretch too far for the building's layout. It started with the mirrors. I'd pass her door on my way to work, and every time, I'd catch my reflection in a mirror she'd hung in her hallway. But it wasn't right. My face looked stretched, my eyes too big, like a funhouse distortion. I'd blink, and it was normal again, but the unease lingered. I started taking the stairs to avoid her door, but I could still feel her watching, her muttering louder when I passed. One night, I came home late, the elevator broken. Her door was open wider than usual, the hallway behind it dark, endless. I heard a sound, a low, rhythmic thump, like a heartbeat in the walls. I froze, my keys jangling in my hand. "Mrs. Verna?" I called. No answer, just a thumping, steady and deep. I should have walked away, but something pulled me closer, like a thread tugging at my chest. I stepped inside. The hallway was longer than it should have been. The walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of me. Older, younger, pale, bleeding. The thumping grew louder, vibrating through the floor. I walked, my footsteps muffled, the air growing colder with each step. The mirrors multiplied, their reflections twisting my face, but not my face, smiling when I wasn't, moving when I stood still. I found a door at the end, heavy and iron, unlike anything in our cheap complex. The thumping was deafening now, shaking my bones. I pushed it open, and the room beyond was a cavern, walls slick with something black and glistening. In the center stood Mrs. Verna, her back to me, her cardigan hanging off her like a shroud. She was chanting, her voice layered, like a dozen people speaking at once. Around her, shapes moved, human but wrong, their limbs too long, their faces blank. She turned, her eyes white, no pupils, and smiled. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice echoing in my skull. The shapes lunged, their hands cold and slick, pulling me toward the mirrors. I fought, kicking and screaming, but they were too strong. My reflection in the nearest mirror opened its mouth, and I felt myself unravel, like thread being pulled from a seam. I woke in my bed, my clothes damp, my hands scratched raw. Mrs. Verna's door was closed when I checked, but the thumping never stopped, faint but constant, like a pulse in the building. I moved out, but the mirrors followed. Every reflection now shows a piece of that hallway, a glimpse of her white eyes. I don't know what she's guarding in that endless corridor, but it knows me now, and it's waiting. Cedar Lane was a quiet stretch of duplexes, each with a small yard and a shared fence. I'd lived there for a year, next to Mr. Grayson, a widower who kept his blinds shut and his grass overgrown. He was polite but distant, always carrying a toolbox, fixing things nobody saw break. His hands were calloused, his nails always caked with dirt, like he'd been digging in places he shouldn't. It started with the dreams. Every night, I'd see a room small, windowless, with walls that pulsed like a heartbeat. A single chair sat in the center, stained with something dark. I'd wake sweating. The image burned into my mind. The air in my bedroom thick with the smell of damp earth. I chalked it up to stress, but the dreams felt too real, too specific. Then I heard the knocking, soft at first, coming from a wall we shared, always at midnight. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I'd knock back, thinking it was a pipe or a prank, but the rhythm never changed. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall and heard a faint sob, muffled, like someone crying through cloth. I called out to Mr. Grayson through the wall, but he didn't answer. The sobbing stopped, replaced by a low hum, like a machine waking up. I started watching him. He'd leave his house at odd hours, always with that toolbox, returning with his clothes streaked with dirt. I asked the neighbors about him, but they just shrugged. "He's always been odd," they said. "Keeps to himself." I saw the way their eyes darted to his house, uneasy. One day, I saw him leave, toolbox in hand, and I couldn't resist. I picked a lock on his back door. Stupid, I know, but the dreams were eating me alive. Inside, his house was barren, the air heavy with that earthy smell. I found a door in the kitchen, half hidden behind a cabinet, leading to a basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder, thicker, like wading through mud. The basement was the room for my dreams. The chair was there, its stains darker, wetter. The walls were covered in scratches, words I couldn't read, carved deep. In the corner was a pile of dirt, and sticking out of it, a hand, pale, rigid, fingers curled like claws. I stumbled back, my breath catching, and the knocking started, loud, coming from the walls, the floor, everywhere. I ran, but the door wouldn't open. The hum grew louder, the air vibrating, and I saw him, Mr. Grayson, standing at the top of the stairs, his eyes black, his toolbox open, spilling dirt. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice not his own, layered with something ancient. The hand in the dirt twitched, and I screamed, throwing myself at the door. It gave way, and I ran, not stopping until I was miles away. I'm in a new town now, but the dreams haven't stopped. The room is always there, the chair, the hand. Last night, I woke to 3 knocks at my window, and outside, in the moonlight, was Mr. Grayson, his toolbox open, dirt spilling onto the grass. I don't know what he's building down there, but it's not just a room, and it's calling me back. The cottages on Laurel Road were quaint, their gardens bursting with color, except for Mr. Lyle's. His yard was barren, just dirt and rocks, like something had sucked the life out of it. He was a quiet man, always in overalls, his hands rough from years of work nobody knew about. He'd nod when I passed, but his eyes were distant, like he was looking through me to something else. It started with the glow. At night, a faint, sickly green light pulsed from his backyard, leaking through my curtains. I'd peek out, expecting a lantern or a phone, but it was just him, kneeling in the dirt, his hands buried deep. The light seemed to come from the ground itself, flickering like a dying bulb. I'd blink, and it was gone, Mr. Lyle vanishing into his house. The sounds came next, low, grinding, like stone on stone, coming from his side of the fence. I'd hear it at odd hours, always when I was alone, noise crawling under my skin. I tried asking him about it, catching him as he hauled a wheelbarrow of dirt to his yard. "You digging something out there?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He didn't look up. "Just gardening," he muttered, his voice rough, like he'd swallowed gravel. He wheeled the barrow away, the dirt inside glinting oddly, like it was wet with something thicker than water. I started watching him. He'd work at night, always alone, the green light pulsing stronger. One night, I saw shapes moving in his yard, not human, but vague, like heat waves with limbs. They danced around him, and he didn't flinch, just kept digging. I told myself it was exhaustion, my eyes playing tricks, but the grinding grew louder, now joined by a faint whisper, like voices trapped underground. I called a friend, a landscaper, to check my yard, hoping he'd find something normal, bad soil, gas leak. He found nothing, but his face paled when he looked over the fence. "That's not dirt," he said, pointing at Mr. Lyle's yard. "It's too alive." I broke into his yard that night, armed with a shovel. The ground was warm, pulsing under my feet, the green light bright enough to cast shadows. I dug, the dirt clinging to my shovel like tar. At 2 feet, I hit something hard, a glass sphere glowing, filled with swirling shapes. I touched it, and the whisper screamed, "You're too late." The shapes lunged, not from the sphere but from the ground, their hands cold, pulling me down. I fought free, running back to my house, but the light followed, seeping through my walls. Mr. Lyle was at my door the next morning, his eyes glowing faintly green. "You shouldn't touch what's buried," he said, and walked away. I moved, but the glow is in every shadow now, and the grinding never stops. I don't know what Mr. Lyle unearthed, but it's awake, and it's watching me.